Good evening, Boston. I'm really excited. Should be fine, right? I'm really excited about this talk, even if it's lightning talk. My name is Alexey. I'm doing front-end job in DataRobot, where we create the best platform for machine learning automation. Besides that, I'm a frequent speaker on local conferences. Well, not in Boston yet. And I'm doing open source, and some of the pieces I use in work, and some of them I'm really excited about to share with you, share with people in general, and get some feedback, and possibly convert some of people to users of the things I do. As you may notice from my name and from my accent, I'm not local. I'm not from Boston. I recently moved to Boston just a couple of days ago, actually, from the beautiful city of Kyiv, which is capital of Ukraine. And I strongly recommend to go there at least once, at least for a couple of days, because it's a beautiful city with beautiful people, with amazing food, amazing things to see, amazing things to experience. And one of the things that you definitely need to see there, definitely need to be a part, at least for an evening, is our amazing JavaScript community. And you definitely need to visit at least some of our meetups, which we have at least once in a month, like for React, for JavaScript in general, for Node.js, for Angular, for different things. And I'm a frequent speaker on our local conferences and meetups, and since I moved to Boston, I need to start creating some social life here. So I also think that I want to continue doing doing public talks. So that's why I'm here. I will try to make a small lightning talk just to say hi from Ukraine, from our community. And fun fact about me, in our community, I'm known, it's me on bottom right of this photo. In our community, I'm known as a guy who can make lightning talk something like 1 hour long. So I apologize in advance, and I hope I will try to stay short on it. So the thing I want to share today, the thing I want to discuss today, is something that helped me a while ago in my project, and I found it really valuable in our internal projects, in general, is something related to how we treat data, which is not just UI state like element size or animation duration or something like this, but data which is actually about what our applications are about, which is domain data, which is something that users directly operate with. And since, well, it's not the thing that I want to discuss, not particularly related to React.js, but since we use React.js not for just one-page websites or some landing pages, I assume we definitely, all of us, most of us, work on something bigger, some single-page applications, maybe not of size like DataRobot or HubSpot applications, but still something that is not trivial, something with user interaction that takes not just a couple of seconds, but at least for a couple of minutes or even longer. And there is a particular level of complexity in these applications, which is related to the way how we treat data that comes from server or any other real-time APIs. And there is usually one particular problem that, well, at least I've seen everyone faces, is that the way how we fetch the data and describe it in UI can affect the developer experience and the way how we debug the application, how we extend it, how we fix it. For example, let's assume there is just a piece of our code somewhere in application where we need to just get generic data from server, for example, user information with a particular ID, so it's just a single value, single object. and we need to render it. We need to show the screen that shows, for example, user profile. So there's several things that will happen with this code in the future after you merge it, after you deploy it. At least, at some point, at least someone will need to understand, some other developer in your team will need to understand what exactly is shown on this page. And like, this developer will need to either extend the page, for example, show an additional value, an additional field from the user information, from the user profile, or there will be some bug related to a particular other value in this user profile related to, for example, name formatting or phone number formatting or anything else which is related to a particular field in this possibly large payload that comes from server. And the problem is that usually if we don't explicitly state in JavaScript code how exactly the user profile, the user object looks like, since it just comes from server side and we just use it directly. Here's an object, here's JSON, and here's fields that we extracting from it. So the problem is that new developers or any other developer in your team, in favor to, for example, show an additional field from the user profile on the screen, they will need to somehow see, they will need to somehow understand what's exactly saved in that particular file, in that particular profile, in that particular object, in order to understand and make the next step in actually writing that code, adding that particular field. So if you don't have an explicit type or explicit data shape somewhere in JavaScript code that explains how exactly user profile looks like, developer will need to actually run the application, open the network panel in Chrome developer tools, for example, like in general in developer tools, and actually explore the particular request where the application gets this user profile in order to actually find a particular field that should be added or should be fixed or something else. So you see this particular scenario where something trivial as knowing what data comes to the UI is complicated just because developers should explore it. It doesn't trivial just to find what's exactly inside this object. You should find it by making some kind of real-time experiment, which means run the application, and sometimes it's not that trivial because of complex backend environment or something like this. This developer should make particular steps in the application in order to get this particular request done, and so on and so forth. I'm pretty sure most of you had this case at least once where it's not that easy to understand what comes from the server side. So the answer to this problem, this developer experience problem, what I found and used, and it worked for me and worked for my team, is the use of, oh, that was a hidden question, the use of a pattern called value objects. It's something that, it's not my invention, it's something that comes from some older ecosystems, some older technologies like C#, Java, like anything else that works in enterprise, for example. And the value object, well, generic description from Wikipedia is a small object. It should be a small object which specifies a particular simple, by simple I think it means unique and trivial, I think, entity in domain data. And there is a particular rule about this value object, which works amazing for React. I will mention it later. Is that two value objects can be equal. They will definitely not be equal by their reference, since each unique created object in JavaScript will be unique by their reference. But value objects have the rule to be equal by actual value they contain inside them. Meaning, if two value objects represent user, and these users have the same ID, the same name, the same age, and the same like other fields, it means these two value objects are equal. That's the main rule, and it actually affects how the code should be written and how this object should be treated. So without any libraries, without any NPM modules, without any dependencies, these value objects can be represented as a simple, plain JavaScript class where constructor gets a generic payload, which is actually a payload that we receive from server side. And the main idea is to actually provide each particular field explicitly, which actually creates some kind of self-documented code where new developers will be able to see what exactly they operate with a particular fields, maybe with some default values in cases where server-side payload doesn't provide particular values. And this particular thing is pretty enough to start with, just to see how it works for your team, just to see how it becomes easier to debug things, to provide. It makes it easier to extend existing things, just because you know exact shape of data you work with, and you don't need to make any experiments with the application just to figure out what's happening in this particular state. And the way how it works, it's pretty much like just the creating of JavaScript objects using class and providing some particular payload, which is set of fields with their values. And if you provide some default values right inside this constructor, it means you may need to provide less data when you instantiate this object. And regarding that description that I showed before, there is two particular things that worth doing in value objects is that there should be, it's good to have these two methods, such as copy, that receives a generic object which has some probably particular fields that you want to override. And since React community, React.js itself trying to force you to use immutable things, it is better to use copy method that provides a new value object instead of overwriting some fields directly inside existing object. So meaning, if you start making new value objects by using copy method, at some point you will be able to use equals method just to make sure that two separate value objects are equal or not based on their actual value, but not their reference. So at some point I found that we're doing, like, we started doing value objects in the way that we actually were writing JavaScript code for copy and equals method. And at some point I found that it is actually easier to somehow make an abstract class to hide those pretty generic logic of equals and copy methods, and just make sure that developers are providing the actual value of these value objects, which is default values, which is list of keys that are exposed directly from this object. And even more, if we can do it, even more, it would be better if we can somehow use types for value objects. So I end up creating an abstract class record, which can be used in a way that you only need to provide a list of keys, preferably with their types. If you use flow type or TypeScript, it looks almost in the same way with just small difference for TypeScript. And in JavaScript, besides flow type, you leverage the power of class fields, something that is in stage 3. Stage 3, it's not yet a JavaScript like the actual part of language, but it's going to be like pretty soon, I think. So as you see here, it's pretty easy to write. It's pretty easy to read for any other developers, since it's just a name of some domain object, some entity in your system, and a list of fields that can be used somewhere in application. For example, on user profile screen or in some list of things in application, and etc., etc. So at some point, I even open sourced this abstract class record, and now it's called data class. It's available on NPM. It has pretty awesome domain name, dataclass.js.org, which is easier to remember, and you don't need to find like slides after the talk. So it's really easy to start with, and it pretty much works in the same way. Like, you describe your value object, you instantiate the object, and then you use copy and equals in the places where you need to use them, and in order to achieve a particular thing you want. Also, we found it pretty useful to provide an additional getter methods that, based on a particular instance, based on a particular value object, are able to provide even more essential data, even more insight regarding a particular entity, meaning there can be some particular logic that provides an additional information based on generic data from value object, and it's better to put it in some getter method and reuse it in different components in different places of application, instead of just duplicating the same logic of, for example, this age greater or equal than 18. So yeah, the main idea, the main reasons to use this particular library is that the way how copy and equals work, I've got from Scala and Kotlin. These two languages have this data class thing out of the box. It works amazing, and the syntax is pretty much the same as I did for data class library. So probably if you have someone in your team who works with Scala, for example, or with Kotlin, they will find it pretty easy to work with, despite on using JavaScript that they possibly hate. And the thing works with both Flow and TypeScript. I'm trying to make as much as possible testing just to make sure that it actually works. I use it in a project where I use Flow, so it definitely works for Flow, because otherwise I will need to fix it, at least for my project. Methods copy and equals are pretty generic. They don't depend on a particular entity or particular list of keys, so they just abstract, just generic, and work for everything just because they contain the same logic. And this library is just 700 bytes in case you actually care about it. So that means that pretty much zero impact to your bundle size. And the reasons why to use this pattern is, as I mentioned, it's self-documented code. Everyone sees the data they work with. Everyone is able to just trivially in one step figure what are the new fields can be used to extend the functionality or fix the functionality, depends on task. Also, if you use some IDEs with auto-suggestions or IntelliSense or any related plugins, you will get all those fields suggested to you directly after hitting dot. So it amplifies your performance. It definitely affects your development experience in a good way. And you will see, well, at least I found it pretty useful, and that at some point domain data and shape of domain data will be changed, and you actually can find the history of these changes directly in your repository, directly in your Git history, by simply looking at differences like added fields, changed fields, or deleted fields. It sometimes actually helps to figure what's happened with a particular bug, and like a lot of other things. And I guess that's it. I guess I did it. I tried. I did my best. Thank you.